Quick thoughts for today, more of an update on some stuff I'm working on. I am working on a new collaborative exhibition, I guess. We applied for it. We made like a sample piece, and we, being a local photographer here under the name of RGT Shots, which you can find on Instagram and Facebook. So we applied for this just for a space at a library, and I went and checked out the space. I've heard of the space before, and just thought, hey, recently, she's been getting her first couple public, pieces up. She actually hasn't had one up yet. It'll be in a couple of weeks that she's gonna actually show anything in public for the first time. And I just thought, I went in there. I was like, man, this is a big space. I wouldn't be able to fill this by myself. And I wonder what we could do if we did something together, so that it would just be another thing for her CV. I mean, it'll be my CV too, but I just thought it'd be something cool to do. And I didn't have all the ideas fleshed out, and that's something that's kind of new for me, and it kind of links to the main part of the conversation today in the essay about meaning and because the question is going to be oh, what if people don't get it, but anywhere there's nothing to get, right? And so in this circumstance, we're kind of working backwards. We're hey, there's a space, and we want to use that space, and we want to exhibit some work, but we don't have anything definitive specifically right now to exhibit. She brought an idea to me a couple of weeks back, if not longer, because she saw something of Gerard Richter's where he had painted over some photographs. I've never seen those works. I've seen his large abstracts where he uses these huge squeegees and it's crazy thick paint and textures and just amazing. I love that stuff, but I haven't seen this thing of him painting over photographs. So she showed me some stuff, and I was like, I don't really think I'm too interested in that. She's like, well, I wouldn't want you to do it that way. And she does boudoir photos, she does landscapes, cityscapes, portraits, family photos. It's kind of half art, half service. And so I don't remember if we ended up talking about it more then, but I kind of at some point thought about it and was like, okay, well, I really like the landscapes that you do and the cityscapes and stuff. And I was like, maybe I can work with that. I have painted very few landscapes, very few. Only one really true, or two really true landscapes that I use a reference photo for, and I've done 2 or 3 that there was no reference photo for, and I would just call them an abstracted landscape, just because I don't know what else to call it. But it was very loose, and just composition came from my head, and still mostly experiment in color. But they were very loosely they look like a landscape, just not of anything specific or anywhere, or again, I didn't have a reference for them. So anyway, I thought about this and I was like, maybe I could paint over some landscapes. Maybe, I don't know what I would do exactly. So once I found that space, I was like, wait, this is maybe what we could fill that space with. And so I talked to her about it, and we kind of created a little bit of a plan. But the thing is, usually, I feel there's an opportunity somewhere, but then I've got so many ideas on the go that I'm oh, maybe I'll get this exhibition rolling, or maybe I'll this body of work is what I'll work on now because I have a space for it. And sometimes you're already working on a body of work. Usually it's not how I do it. I kind of go piece by piece by piece and just create art like that. But some people definitely are working on a body of work and they don't have a place to show it yet, or they're exploring something in their work for years, and at any time they can kind of take the pieces they have and exhibit it because it's still cohesive together. We found the space, we wanted to use it, and we wanted to use the opportunity to experiment with this thing. So that's what we're doing. We did one test print where she printed an 18 by 24 inch this landscape photo that she took out by Crow's Nest Pass, and it's a beautiful photo, and I was there when she took it, and I really enjoy it, and I kind of played with that with some acrylic paint and some ink, and I liked the outcome. She really likes the outcome. I think that it'll be a little more comfortable the more that I do, and we're planning to do 15 to 17. We don't want to order any more of these prints though until we actually have the acceptance that we have the space for this time, allotted time to exhibit it. So we'll see what happens, but it is something that is challenging me in a new way. One, because we're talking about a whole body of work where there's no definitive meaning right now. We haven't made an artist statement. We just talked about the process and partly the concept is just that, hey, you work in this medium and I work in this medium. All the landscapes are Southern Alberta. We're in Southern Alberta. Like, I'm going to use my skills in this way. She titles the pieces beforehand as well. That kind of informs my music decision. The photo and the title inform kind of like the music decision because I'm trying to find a mood, and then I paint with that. And like I said, I've only done this once so far, and it was just tricky because unlike painting an abstract piece or a landscape or anything, unlike just painting, period, on a blank canvas, I can't just paint over this. Like, if I mess something up, like, I mean, I don't want to cover the whole photo, right? Like, I want to work with what the photo gives me in a certain way and highlight certain parts, obscure certain parts, just play with the blueprint that's already there. And the tricky part is that these are all beautiful photos by themselves. It's not like, these really aren't great, so let me just play with them and let a little bit of texture through or some color through. Like, no, the majority of what you see is still a photograph, and the paint is on the minority of what's actually being, in that space, covering the print. But yeah, it's definitely challenging me in new ways. They have to be a little more calculated and move a little slower, and also because I don't have a purpose as much. Like, it's not forced, it's fun. Like, it is still like, oh, I'm just experimenting with something. Like, that's kind of the purpose, is that I'm experimenting with something new, being challenged in this new way. It's making me a little uncomfortable. I'm a little concerned. What if she doesn't like it? I don't know, but I think that, she liked that first one, and we both had said, like, I hope that in the future ones you get a little more aggressive or a little more wild or loose. And I was like, yeah, like, that's really where I think it will get to with some of these. So I don't know, we're just going to see. We're going to see what happens. But that's kind of what I'm working on lately. And the reason that I said that, again, relates to the main part of the podcast here is that this doesn't yet have meaning. And we're kind of working backwards and finding meaning in what we're doing or creating a meaning. Like, the initial concept was just, let's collaborate in this way to make some work that, I'm sure other people have done things similar, but I mean, nothing that I've seen or like explicitly heard about where there was one photographer and one person who's painting over it and kind of just, yeah. Again, I don't think it's a crazy, wholly unique and original idea that no one's done before, but I haven't really lifted it from elsewhere directly either. So the purpose is just exploring that relationship. But again, that's new for me. And so I'm talking today about, like, what if they don't get it? What if someone doesn't get the work or they don't get the exhibition? What does that mean? How do you deal with that? I've alluded to this a little bit before. Some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today was back in one of the first, I don't even know, the first 5 episodes when I was talking about roles and responsibilities of an artist. And some of that stuff's going to get brought up, and audience responsibility is going to get brought up. Again, attaching meaning to artwork. I remember that Dave Bullied and I talked a little bit about this, but I don't think it was actually when the camera was running. So I think we had some great conversation that isn't recorded, and I think this was part of it too. But I can't remember now if we got that on the podcast or not. But we will talk about some of that today too. So yeah, what if they don't get the meaning? So I'm going to give you a couple examples of how this has happened to me and my feelings about it. One of them was a long time ago. I'm trying to remember when. I should have looked it up. I'm going to say, I don't know, like 2012, like 10 years ago, or maybe like 8. So 2012-ish, and I had a little solo exhibition in the stairwell. It's called La Scala Gallery at the U of S. It just goes between the drawing studio and the painting studio, basically. There's like a lecture hall and whatever. But it's in like the Fine Arts building, if we want to call it that, the Murray building at the U of S, or University of Saskatchewan, if you're not familiar with USask and the abbreviations. So I had a little thing there, and this was working on the concept of consent. I wish that I was thorough enough and smart enough to actually bring the artist statement and read from that, but I will basically outline it really quickly and tell you that the whole point of it was that I was putting these female forms, figures, and faces in a context of ambiguity, where there is somewhat of aggressive acts, but we don't know if the participant is willing or unwilling in those acts, because there are things that people do that they enjoy that can be aggressive, that they are a perfectly willing participant. Maybe they've initiated these things, but we don't get to see the intention in that piece. So they were mainly paintings and drawings with like pastel, chalk pastel, oil pastel, and acrylic paint. And I think that was pretty much what I was using on like canvas and boards. And yeah, there was just some with just like portraits of women with duct tape over their mouth. Some of them were tied to chairs, things like that. And I remember that this was just one of the first times that I ever ran into the fact, like, hey, I tried to push the limits and I tried to do something, and people didn't get it. Like, that was the first time that happened. I mean, I've been very inexperienced with showing any work, especially anything that I would call strong. And I don't mean strong as in quality, I mean as in concept for people to look at and be like, whoa, what's going on here? And I remember in one of my senior drawing classes, there was a student who was, I don't know, a couple decades older than me at the time, and I don't remember how she expressed it. It wasn't like dramatic, but she was expressing the fact that she thought these were like these horrible, violent acts that are, negative, and talking about men doing this and that and the other thing, and like how this is like traumatizing and stuff. And I don't know, because that was the whole point of it was like a critique class, right? Like a senior drawing class. And I don't remember everything my prof said, but I remember her, highlighting the fact, like, you're bringing your own history and your own experiences to this piece, and that's what happens. Like, because my artist statement, my explanation, the piece itself, the title, none of that gives you an idea as to, well, I mean, it all gives you an idea, but none of it explicitly defines the context. And that was very purposeful. Like, everything there, like, one of the titles I remember of one of the women who was, like, tied to a chair, it was called Soft, like, in parentheses. What was the other one called? I still have that piece. And the other one I can't remember the name of right now, and I still have that one. There's two that I still have from that series of work. And I really quite enjoy them still, which is one reason I still have them, because I can't find a venue for them to sell, and I don't want to just give them away or paint over them, because they're beautiful pieces, in my opinion. Anyway, but there's no indication as to explicitly like the intention of what was happening, which is the purpose. And she thought she knew. She wasn't saying maybe. She was bringing her own personal history, which is what everybody does, and she was defining the piece for herself, which is what most people do. Some people come to a piece with more openness and say, I don't really know what's going on. I think this is what's happening, but that's because those are my experiences and whatever else, right? And it could be telling of how you're approaching the piece, like why you're approaching it that way, and who you are as a person. Sometimes, other times not. But I remember that discussion, and it didn't really do a lot to pacify me when the thing that happened later. So there was an artist statement in the stairway. It had been after this critique, and someone drew like this photorealistic eye. And it was just one eye with like a little bit of the eyelid and I think the eyebrow. And there's like a very cursive handwritten note that was attached to the artist statement. And it said something about misogyny. And that was honestly the one word I just remember. And I've got a picture of it somewhere, or I used to. I think it was on my Facebook. I'm assuming it still is. Like on my FK Arts Facebook. And, but it said this thing about misogyny and like beheading or like decapitation, and I was like, what the heck is this person going on about? And I was looking at all the pieces, and there's one piece that has like a woman where it's mostly the portrait that you see, but you see a little bit of the shoulders. It would be like the angle would have been like a straight on angle, and her hands were kind of tied in front of her, like as if she were almost in like a praying position, except with her hands like extended, her arms extended on the bed and clasped together and facing forward, and you were on the other side of the bed taking the photo, if that makes sense. Anyway, but the thing was that right around the neckline, like I had used, that's the other thing, I used nail polish on these pieces too, and I used a lot of splatters on some of them, and it did look aggressive, but there was like a silver paint splatter that I used nail polish for, and it went right kind of across the neckline. And I think that's what she was talking about when she was like, oh, you're beheading women, and this is misogynistic work. And there's clearly you do not read the artist statement. Like, the artist statement, I felt, made things clear that this is open for interpretation, but at the same time, that this is not my intention. Like, this is why I wish I could find the artist statement. And who knows, I would read it now differently than I would have when I created it. It's been a long time. But I remember being very sore at this note. I was very upset. I went and made a painting immediately that said, if you can't read, don't write. And it was like an abstract piece, but then it had an eye that was like, I used the eye they drew as a reference for the eye that I painted like into the piece, and the rest of it was abstract and just a lot of black and like raw sienna and stuff. So yeah, I was very upset. I was super upset that someone, would call me these negative things, would misinterpret the work, blah, 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 blah. And I felt like this was maybe the beginning of me thinking about responsibility in a certain way. This was before I heard this David Cronenberg quote, which I'm pretty sure like gets brought up in that episode. I don't remember which one, 3, 4, 5, about artist roles and responsibilities, that the artist basically shouldn't have any responsibilities because then you're cutting off like the best tool they have as an artist. And I do believe that, but that's the thing, is like I gave an artist statement for a reason. If I completely didn't want any context whatsoever and the viewer not going with any idea at all, then I wouldn't have provided an artist statement. But I did, and I made sure that I clarified what I'm not doing there, what it's not about, but yet that things are vague enough for people to see what is going on. And I purposely, even though you may say it's a male gaze, I purposely took any male form out of it. It just focused on females' faces and figures and forms in these different scenarios and poses and contexts. But again, this whole thing was about consent in a way, and about challenging a viewer who was bringing their own personal history to the work and wondering if their experiences might influence the meaning that they derive. So, someone reminded me, though, that the work was successful because it got a reaction. However, the question is, what if they don't get it? This person clearly didn't get it, and I had something specific I wanted them to get. Even though the specific thing was, I want you to get that you are bringing something to this work, and you don't know the meaning. And yes, I understand the meaning is going to be different for everyone, because the point is that the meaning is ambiguous. I just, whatever. At the time, I was really upset. I was super frustrated. I didn't know what to do about it, because it's not like, I don't know who that person was. They didn't sign it. Like, I don't no idea if they were in a class of mine, if they were just passing through, if they were an instructor. Like, just, I have no idea. So I had no way to contact them and try to, discuss the matter, and that's probably for the best, because that would have been super awkward, I think, and I don't know how that would have gone, but I felt like they didn't get it, and I just didn't know what to do. So I poured my anger and frustration into that one piece that I said I made after, if you can't read, don't write, expressing the fact that they shouldn't be commenting on something if they aren't reading the statement that I wrote, because I wrote it for a reason, and they obviously couldn't comprehend the plain English I was speaking, which I understand is a very aggressive way to express that, but this is completely how I felt in that moment. I really was frustrated. So what if they don't get it? I mean, at the time, if they didn't, I just had to express frustration and anger, is what I had to express, and I couldn't do anything about it. That was it. It was difficult because I just wasn't letting go of the fact, despite the fact that it's ironic, despite the fact that I was trying to challenge people to think about where they're coming from when they look at something, and someone could get the meaning to be the opposite of what I had intended, not the opposite, but I mean that they called me on something that I was not doing, or that I feel like I am not, that they made their own narrative, which is what I was saying happens, but they were so sure of it, and they were so wrong. And this upset me because of someone having, this whole thing of not being able to separate the art from the artist. Like, calling me a misogynist is different than saying this work is very aggressive towards women. I think they could be two different things. At the same time, I understand that people could say that they're not two different things. That's how I reacted in the moment then. And that's the thing, I had a very strong concept. And if I didn't have as strong of a concept, it wouldn't matter as much. That work kind of expanded into like a partnered exhibition, and we ended up showing it at 3 different spaces in Saskatchewan. And one of those spaces was like a very sex positive, like sexual health shop, I guess, because they had a lot of other things going on than just like products to buy. There was a lot of like sessions, there was like therapies, there was yoga, there was like counseling, there was a lot of stuff, and it was it was called Positive Passions. It was a very positive space, and we had work there, and we felt like this is a really interesting space because it fits, but it's also very challenging. And the exhibition title was at one point Crave, and then it was Crave and Consequence. And one of the people that worked at the front desk, after we had installed everything, was a couple days later, they had talked to their manager, who was who was our contact for the store as to who to talk to when we applied for the exhibition, who approved the exhibition, who oversaw the whole thing. Contacted them, said, you know what, this work is kind of disturbing me, this one very specific piece, I have to see it every day when I come to work, and it's really putting me in a negative space. And we were told that they would like to move the piece, like they wanted us to move it. And thankfully they actually told us that's what they wanted to do, and we got to go in and move the piece ourselves. So at least they didn't take that kind of control away from us. But I was still very upset. I was like, we put thought into the composition of this exhibition and the layout and how people would see things when they came through the door, because there was like a door, a hallway, and a room that we had work in. And none of it was where, there was nothing like in the sales area. It was in like the entryway, the hallway to like the kind of like counseling session room, and then work in that room. So we had it all figured for a reason. And the fact that someone else was to control that space is what upset me, and that's something we're going to get back to. However, I mean, it strays a little bit from the whole purpose of like the meaning thing, because I believe that they understood the meaning. I believe that they felt the work, and someone else reminded me again that should be a compliment to you. Like someone felt so strongly that they didn't want to see it anymore, but it inconvenienced me and made the work not flow as well. Therefore, I was upset because that control was taken away, which again is something I want to revisit in a bit here. The last example that, well, yeah, I guess this does link. Maybe before I get to the last example, I want to like kind of open this up a bit, because I've learned to let go a little bit, and part of this was just showing more work, and part of it was conversations I had with other artists, conversations with instructors, conversations as a class when I was working on my BFA about how the audience is there. And some people have the philosophy that once you put the work up, it's not yours anymore, that it's not your work, it's the audience's work, and they control it from now on. They control the meaning of it, right? Like they control their experience to some degree, they feel certain things, and you can't do anything about it anymore. So some people have this thing of like, well, the work's not yours anymore, it's theirs, which I don't really believe, but it did make me think about the fact that, okay, well, it's their experience, and I've provided an opportunity for them to have an experience, and whatever experience they have is going to be theirs, and it's going to be, I almost said legitimate, but I mean like, it's going to be real or sincere as it could be, and I mean how they express that is something differently, but whatever they are reacting to, I provided the stimuli, and they're reacting to that. So that kind of made me think about things too. Like, well, how much can I really say here? What do I have control of? Nothing anymore. It's out there. If they choose to read the art statement or not, that's something that's not in my control anymore. If they do read it and they misinterpret it, that's not in my control. There's nothing I can do. I just have to let the work just exist out in the world, and that's it. However, it sucks that when people do communicate with you, whether it be online or like with that handwritten note about, expressing that they've completely misinterpreted the work, even though they don't realize it, expressing to you what they don't like about you and or the work. So it makes me want to make artists statements even more clear. I don't think I ever had a controversial exhibition again since then. I focused more on some other stuff. But if I were to bring something back like that, I don't know. I think I'd either be more vague or even more specific, and I'm probably going to lean to more vague because I think I'm more confident as an artist now. I feel like I'm more aware that what the audience thinks doesn't matter as much. I mean, if they were to react in a very unreasonable way and I was put in like harm's way or something like that, that'd be different. But I feel like even more so, I have less responsibility to them. Yet, in a way, I feel like they have a certain responsibility too. The audience has a certain responsibility, but at the same time, they have none. They come with their own, again, history, and then they interpret the work. And they don't read an artist statement, that's on them. They don't look at all the pieces, that's on them. They don't read a title, that's on them. Like, if they want to understand the work, then they have a responsibility to read what I wrote. That's what I feel. That's like a contract. If they don't care about interpreting the work for my intention, but they want to just interpret the work without knowing my intention, they can do that. I can't stop them. And that's the thing. Like, they have a certain amount of responsibility, at the same time almost none, just like me. I don't need to provide an artist statement. I like to, because I would like to guide a viewer who is actually interested into my intention. So I will provide an artist statement. I like to do that. Sometimes it's been a little more cryptic than others. Sometimes it's been very academic and very involved and talked about influences and talked about process and whatever. And other times it was more of like a poem and a poetic piece. I just think that we both have equal amount of responsibility to each other, which is sometimes close to none. It just depends on what someone wants to get out of it when they're there. So what happens if someone doesn't get it? I guess nothing, unless they react in a way that's incredibly unreasonable or illegal or puts you in harm. Then that's a whole different thing, and then there's some other things to think about. But I do believe that because much more time has passed, I've had more conversations, I've learned things, I've grown, that I feel like, although it could be frustrating, I also feel like I can just let that go. One of my favorite things, though, is creating abstract pieces with little, like, what I'll call Easter eggs. Like, the title has certain, like, lines that are borrowed from lyrics or from poems or something, and if it catches someone's eye, and they're like, that's kind of familiar, then they might have more insight into the piece than it provides, right? But it's an abstract piece that everyone, more than anything else that I can think of, like, whatever they come into it with is like going to be really their experience. Sometimes the titles can steer them, and sometimes they won't understand the title, so it doesn't steer them any which way. And I love that. I love when people can connect with an abstract work. It's one of my favorite things because it's not clear. It's very much emotional for me, like more than 50% of the time, or at least half the time now. Other times it's maybe just it's design work, or it's just an expression of art, and not so much a concept, and yet it still has a meaning to me, it still has an emotion, it still has a feeling, and someone else can get something completely different, and it's a beautiful thing. I love it. Now I lost my train of thought, but to get to the epilogue, which is a little bit of a shift in gears, but about control, which I kind of alluded to already, one area where I feel like I haven't grown, or I don't know, it's just something that's really frustrating for me. I'm still trying to figure out, even despite how many exhibitions I've had, different venues, different people I'm dealing with, I don't have any representation, I'm just doing it myself, that I get frustrated when it comes to me losing control. Not like losing control in the moment and wilding out, I mean like someone is taking control away from me from something I thought was in my control. So there's a local venue that I had some work in that is not an art gallery, but they have a gallery space within their business where they have been showing art for years before this owner. There was a previous owner who started this, like, you know, they had a space, and it was like they would have a rotating curator that would change annually, and they would seek out people, and people would submit work, and then whatever, and it was this whole thing. And I've shown there before when it was the prior owner, and this time around, you know, I had shown there again. And this is when I was doing this MK Ultra work. And there's something that you can find on my Facebook and my Instagram, but especially on the Facebook. There's an album with the MK Ultra exhibition, and the artist statement is there as well. But basically, I was having a time, like, I was trying to present the facts of MK Ultra alongside with some of the myths, some of the fun in thinking about conspiracy theories, and also that there was legitimate conspiracy that's well documented and true. And they were mostly portraits of people. Some of them were of, you know, doctors that were documented as doing really horrible things in Canada and the U.S. There's certain things like Operation Paperclip, blah, 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 blah. But then there was like more playful, fun things and weird things, and it was like poking fun at like the Illuminati and like Project Monarch Butterfly and Nicki Minaj and like whatever. There's just a bunch of stuff. You can go down the rabbit hole with it, and that was the point, was to express both of these things in this complex way of like factual and playful and putting people in a position and an opportunity to think about things. And the two cornerstones, or the cornerstone of the exhibition, was two pieces. They were the biggest pieces. They were 18 by 24 on masonite board. Well, there was canvas. There was canvas that was loose that I used an adhesive like on to paste to the masonite board. And then, yeah, so there are two portraits, and they were both called Cult Leader, and one said Cult Leader and in parentheses Harry, and then one was called Cult Leader in parentheses Charlie. And they were on one wall. They were the only two pieces on that wall, and those were the end of the exhibition, and they were the things that you would see first when you walk into the space, or when you walk into the space. Those are the two pieces you saw first. So one was a portrait of Harry S. Truman, who basically, you know, short form approved the CIA, and then the CIA's whole thing with MK Ultra and whatever. So he's got this association to MK Ultra and these very documented factual things that happened as part of MK Ultra that were horrible. Part of that being what was called psychic driving, basically trying to experiment on people with LSD. And run these experiments unbeknownst to the people. They were not willing participants. And that links to Charlie Manson, or Charles Manson, because of his kind of using the same methods with LSD and other drugs and psychic driving and breaking people down mentally and controlling them. And so I just thought it was an interesting contrast between the two. And I put up the work, it was there. I went, you know, a week later, and one piece was gone. And I thought maybe it's because it had sold, even though it should stay up. The owner thought that maybe they'd want it gone right away if it had sold, and just leave the title card up. Anyway, the piece was moved to another wall. I only used 3 walls because the 4th wall had a huge rectangular like hole cut in the wall, almost like an open kitchen type thing. There wasn't very much space to put work, so I avoided that wall completely. And it was on that wall by itself, and there was just an empty space where it used to be. And he said that, oh, you know, like, I don't really want people seeing that first thing they come in. It's Charles Manson. It kind of gives the wrong vibe. This person chose to not be part of the curation process. They chose not to know anything that they've expressed many times. They don't want to be involved with any of that. Yet they made these choices, even though they could have known in advance what the work was going to be about. They did not read the artist statement. They did not comprehend or understand or even ask me, you know, what the context was and like why he was there. And like, I don't think it's a question. It's an interesting question. And the other part of them was that like on Harry S. Truman's, you know, forehead, it said lies. And then there's a little spot like on Charlie's shirt that said truth. And that was a playful thing too, because Harry S. Truman had lied about the intentions of things many times. There was also text. The text on the very bottom that was like bigger on Harry S. Truman said American Gestapo, because he's quoted with saying the statement like, oh, if I knew the CIA was going to turn to the American Gestapo, I wouldn't have created it. And there's other things on the contrary that he said that show that, you know, he was lying about certain things and intentions as to why he wanted to do things and start these programs. Whereas, well, Charles Manson, he may have been incredibly mentally ill, if you want to call it that. He believed in what he was doing. He believed in it as truth. He didn't lie to anyone about, like, in the same way, anyway, that Harry S. Truman would. It was like, no, I believe there's this race war, and I think this is how we're going to start it, and we want this. Like, no, he believed in what he was doing. What he was doing was super messed up. Both of the things were really, really messed up. And one of them affected way more people. But only one of these acts was really publicized in a certain way and demonized. So all this stuff I thought was like bringing a serious question, where some of the other stuff was more playful. This was still a little bit playful. The text on Charlie's was Helter Skelter at the bottom. But it wasn't anything explicit when you see. It was just a portrait with, again, the words Helter Skelter on the bottom, the little word truth on like close to his lapel of his shirt. It just wasn't, there wasn't anything explicit about the work in its physicality that would cause any type of ruckus or any, there was no reason to move it. It was family friendly, like, put it that way. The concepts, I think, also just provided an opportunity for people to think about stuff. It didn't tell you what to think. It said, hey, this is kind of an opportunity here, and it asked the viewer questions very directly. It was a very long statement because it explained some of the facts and explained what I was putting them in with certain contexts, and to be playful and fun, yet also serious. Anyway, and there was someone, who saw some of the work they had on Instagram, and they said, yo, I looked into this, and that's really messed up. Like Frank Olson, who was experimented on by the U.S. government from the CIA through MKUltra, who died. Like, that was a thing, that they slipped him LSD, and then there was a whole, case that they were, like, his family put through, and it was just this whole thing. And I was like, man, I really appreciate that someone actually took the time to tell me that they looked this up and that they had some more knowledge about stuff. I mean, that was kind of the purpose. Anyway, I lost control in that aspect when this person moved it. I didn't challenge them. I'm not very good at being assertive. I usually either get aggressive or passive aggressive, because I'm not very passive either, but I'm definitely not very assertive. And in that instance, I was very passive, which I'm usually not. But the alternative was to either be passive aggressive, or I should have been assertive, but I just couldn't have at that moment. I'm really bad at it. To be like, well, I really don't appreciate the fact that you moved it, blah, blah, blah. And I had a prior relationship with this person that was, for all intents and purposes, I thought a positive relationship. Yet they didn't bother to check in with me, to ask me, to talk with me about it, to ask questions, nothing. They just moved it and then told me afterwards that they did it when I arrived there. The only reason I stopped was because I walked by one day and noticed, whoa, where's that piece? That's gone. Let me go inside next time they're open and see what's up. So along with the thing about what if someone doesn't get it, I mean, that it connects, because, this person didn't get it. They kind of chose not to get it. There was opportunity to have conversation with me, to look at the artist statement, etc. But also this thing is I was expressing something, and the beautiful thing about art for me, which I talked about in, this art as a cathartic process, is the freedom that I have, is that it makes me less anxious, that I'm in my space, and like, if someone doesn't want to show my work in their establishment, that's fine. I wouldn't get upset about that. But why would you move it after the fact? Why wouldn't you have a conversation at the beginning? Why wouldn't you look at the work, get an inventory, be involved in the process? Like, that is what you should be doing if you actually care about what is shown. Anyway, but I felt like there was a lack of it took my freedom away. The work was already done, but the display completely changed. It was completely off. It was the last thing anyone saw, and it was the strongest piece. Like, skillful, quality, like, in those ways, it was the strongest. I feel like the concept also was ruined because it moved it from its partnered piece. And so I felt like the whole thing was off, like the flow was completely off, and it just ruined the experience for me of exhibiting there. And that was not why I made that exhibition, for it to, and that's the only place it got exhibited, because after that I painted over every piece except for the Charles Manson one. I painted over all the rest, and I'll be using them for, I don't know what, something else. But that's the only place where it was exhibited, and that the quality of that exhibition was intercepted and controlled by somebody else. Which is, again, like, if I want to make art, it's because you're always going to run into restrictions, but knowing those restrictions up front is different than having them imposed on you after you thought, okay, this is good. We've got everything here where it's supposed to be. I'm really happy with it. They don't express that they're unhappy with it, and then they kind of go behind your back and change things. That is the trade-off sometimes with not having your own space. And this kind of reminds me of the thing with sitting here with Dave and talking about Guerrilla Art Collective and finding your own spaces and setting your own parameters and being sick of like the curatorial process and being in someone else's space. And I completely understand it. But it's also one thing of like, I've said before, if I had an agent or a representative of my art and I didn't have to deal with like the public, if you want to call it that, I didn't have to deal with people contacting me about commissions and then backing out and blah, blah, blah. I just want to make the work. That's what I really want to do, is make the work. But yes, I obviously want it exhibited in the way that I want it to be exhibited too. I am ranting, and I'm going to end right there. This week, that has been my artist life.